two explosive ingredients put together, the Romans and the Jewish people. Out of this, the Jews were forbidden to keep the seventh-day Sabbath. Enters now the third ingredient of this historical conflict that took place. The growth of the Christian church, which is told about in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, the Bible tells us in Acts chapter 6 and verse 7, then the word of God spread, and the number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith. A great many priests were obedient to the faith. At the risk of repeating myself, Christianity was a Jewish movement in the beginning, starting with the disciples of Jesus. So this is important for us to understand. So there was the Jews, there was the Romans, and then there was this new Christian movement that came up, and this Christian movement was, in fact, a Jewish movement. I talked in church a few weeks ago about a man by the name of Martin Luther. Any of you heard of Martin Luther? Not Martin Luther King, but the other Martin Luther, the great reformer. And some people have thought that Martin Luther was trying to tear down the Catholic Church. He was not, in fact, trying to tear down the Catholic Church. He wanted to remain a Catholic. He wanted to be a Catholic all his life. He wanted to be a priest, but he was trying to get the Catholic Church to reform. The people that were the early Christians, they were not against Jews. They were themselves Jews, and they saw them simply as another aspect of Judaism and part of this movement. This was part of this movement, and so they were Jewish in as of themselves. Well, because of this, as far as the Roman Empire was concerned, they were all one and the same, Jews and Christians. As far as the Roman Empire was concerned, there was no difference between them. They worshipped on the same day. The Jews worshipped on Sabbath. The Christians worshipped on Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath. They worshipped in the same places. The Jews worshipped in the neighborhood synagogues, and then the Christians worshipped in the neighborhood synagogues. As far as Rome was concerned, these two groups were one and the same. They were one and the same. But that was hardly the case in the minds of the Christians and the Jews as time went on. Because while Rome thought them the same, the Jews and Christians knew their major difference, and that major difference was, of course, Jesus. The major difference was Jesus. As the new Christians were convinced that Judaism without Jesus was a bankrupt system, they began to separate themselves from that. Which is why in the book of Acts, wherever the Christians went, they ran into conflict, resistance at the hands of the Jewish antagonists. They were fighting because the Christians were saying, you know what, you're not doing right. You're not living right. But the plot thickens. The Christians were under increasing pressure from the Romans. For a while, Rome ignored the fledgling new Christian group. But then this guy, funny-looking dude, by the name of Nero, who was one of the worst individuals in the history of mankind, he married a woman by the name of Sabrina. Sabrina converted to Judaism. Sabrina converted to Judaism. This turned out to be a negative influence on Nero. Just remember, who you marry can have a big impact on what you do in your life. So one night, Rome was torched. Many believe that Nero was actually the one that torched it. Nero, seeing an opportunity, blamed the Christians for burning the city. And Christians were persecuted without mercy from that point on. They were covered with pitch and lighted up as human lampposts. They would put these poles up, and they put human beings on them, living human beings, and they would cover them in tar, and then at night they would light them. So as people would walk the streets, they would see these burning people and be reminded of who was in control and who was the power. They also would slaughter them, of course. You see some of the burning people there around the Colosseum. They also would slaughter these people in the Roman Colosseum. They would feed them to the animals and make them do all kinds of other things. You guys might have seen that movie. What was that movie with Russell Crowe? Gladiator. Man, you guys got it right. Mr. Martinez is obviously a Russell Crowe fan. So, Mr. Martinez. Did you know one of the first things that Russell Crowe ever did was an Adventist movie? You guys, anyways, it's kind of funny.
What do you do?
He's not Seventh-day Adventist, but he just did a Seventh-day Adventist movie in Australia, which is kind of funny. So if you go way back, there's a little, if you're ever on Jeopardy, when they ask you anything about Russell Crowe, maybe they'll ask you about being an Adventist. Anyways, so, Gladiator. Gladiators, these gladiators, yes, that was part of this Colosseum, but a major part of this Colosseum, a major part of what they enjoyed was watching the Christians being tortured and eaten alive. This was an illicit religion. Well, the Christians decided that they didn't like this type of treatment. They didn't like this type of treatment, obviously. They were not into being burned alive, and they were not into being tortured. So they decided to do something about it. By the way, there was a whole body of anti-Judaic literature condemning the Jews socially and theologically. These things were taking place. There was a brand of infamy imposed by God on the Jews to single them out for punishment they so well deserved for their wickedness. This was being written by Christians, and so there was this persecution that was taking place. Like the poem at the beginning, slowly but surely a new path was being carved in the forest of history, a crooked calf path over which in the end almost all of Christendom would end up following and tramping. So there was all this literature being written by Christians against the Jews, trying to help show that they were different than the Jewish people, that they were separate, they were somehow not like these people. Not like these people. Now, the records show that this change did not occur overnight. This change did not occur overnight. The celebration of the Lord's Supper first was one of the first things to go. It was forbidden on the Sabbath. It was forbidden on the Sabbath, and the pressure began to be on. Then there was a man by the name of Constantine. Constantine. A scary looking dude. He was a man with political savvy, and now in the fourth empire, now in the 4th century, his empire is in trouble. This band of vagabond Christians has grown into an empire-wide movement. Even with 3 centuries of persecution, the Christians have still kept multiplying and multiplying and multiplying. And now there are 2 major constituencies. No longer are the Jews as much as a major factor. There are the pagan Romans and there are the Christian Romans. So how shall they live together in peace? This was Constantine's question. How shall we live together in peace? And so on March 7, 321 AD, Emperor Constantine makes a political move to unite the 2 major constituencies of his empire, the Christian Romans and the secular Romans, the pagan Romans. And he elicits an edict that the venerable day of the sun be a day of rest for all citizens. So March 7, 321 AD, venerable day of the sun. Not a religious day of rest, he said at first. It's not a religious day of rest at first, but a day for all citizens to refrain from work, a day to build harmony and peace throughout the empire. Does this language sound familiar to anything we've read recently? Maybe so, to some of you. Some of you maybe not. I'm not going to talk about that. But just if you read modern news, you may hear some people calling for a day of rest on the venerable day of the sun, not for religious purposes, but just to refrain from work and to build harmony and peace throughout the empire and to protect the environment and all these other things. And on his deathbed, Constantine himself was baptized as a Christian. This was a masterful stroke by Constantine, and it did bring unity and quiet to the empire. Now I want to point something else. This is 321 AD. Jesus died in about 34 AD. So 34 AD. So folks, something to just to hear this. I know that many people have told you that Sunday has been the day of worship throughout. Sunday has been the day of worship throughout since the time that Jesus died, as a memorial or as a memory of his resurrection. The first time anyone ever kept Sunday as a day of any type of significance or holiness within Christianity was nearly 300 years after Jesus died. That was the first time. So hear that. 300 years after Jesus died. So when someone tells you Jesus changed it because of the resurrection, you can say, well, then why didn't it take place for another 300 years? Did it take that long for people to register that what Jesus said to change? What Jesus said to change. There was peace in the land, but there was peace at a price. The Council of Laodicea in 360 AD. Christians shall not Judaize and be idle on Saturday, but shall work on that day. But the Lord's day they shall especially honor, and if possible, do no work on that day. So remember, Constantine says, I'm going to issue this day. I'm going to issue this day as the venerable day. It's not a religious day. It's only to refrain from work, and it's only to bring harmony amongst the nations. Now, just 39 years later, there is now a law being instituted that Christians shall not Judaize and that they shall not be idle on Saturday. In other words, now they must work on Saturday. They must work on Saturday. So it gone from just don't work on Sunday to now you must work on Saturday and then do no work on Sunday. So peace came at a price. It came at a price. Then Bishop Eusebius, he said this, all things whatsoever that were prescribed for the Bible Sabbath, we have transferred them to the Lord's Day as being more authoritative and more highly regarded and first in rank and more honorable than the Jewish Sabbath. In the Jewish Sabbath. Hear this, folks. Hear what I am saying here. This took place not at the hands of Jesus, but at the hands of men. Bishop Eusebius is the one that said, all things whatsoever that were prescribed for the Bible Sabbath, we have transferred, we being who? The bishops have transferred them to the Lord's Day as being more authoritative and more highly regarded and first in rank and more honorable than the Jewish Sabbath. The question is, whose authority shall we follow? Should we follow the Bible, or should we follow folks like Bishop Eusebius? You know, in the Converse Catechism, some of you have heard of a catechism. It's a book that folks read when they're converted to a specific community of faith. And in the Converse Catechism, there is this language. Which is the Sabbath day? Answer. This is in the Catholic Catechism. Answer. What does it say? Saturday is the Sabbath day. Saturday is the Sabbath day. Question. Why do we observe Sunday instead of Saturday? What's the answer? We observe what? Sunday instead of Saturday because the Catholic Church transferred the solemnity from Saturday to Sunday. The Converse Catechism, 2nd edition, page 50. By whose authority shall we follow and change on the day in which we should worship? By the authority of another church or by the authority of the Bible? Cardinal James Gibbons. Here's what he said. You may read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation and you will not find, hear this is a cardinal in the papal church. You may read the Bible from Genesis to Revelation and you will not find a single line authorizing the sanctification of Sunday. The scriptures enforce the religious observance of Saturday. They enforce the religious observance of Saturday. Then why does Rome venerate Sunday? Here's the answer in the Catholic Encyclopedia. This is from the Catholic Encyclopedia. The Church, after changing the day of rest from the Jewish Sabbath of the 7th day of the week to the first, made the third commandment refer to Sunday as the day to be kept holy as the Lord's day. They changed the laws. It says in the Catholic Encyclopedia, it says in the Converse Catechism, James Gibbons, Cardinal James Gibbons, acknowledge all these folks